Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to my autobiography. So, many of you who are a fan of my channel know that I originally started this channel because I had a realization. The realization is about legacy. You know, when in my lifetime, when someone would look back on their ancestors, they would have to go back and look at old black and white photos or just stories of the previous generations. And, all I have of my great-grandfather is a newspaper clip, a newspaper clipping with a couple of pictures in it, where he was, they did a story about him because he was the last person to still drive to town in an ox cart. And he had the last operating, real, working ox cart with trained oxes still in the world at that time. And so that's all I have of him is that, and then one really sketchy picture of him on horseback when he was young. Really black and white, grainy photo of my great-grandfather. So I know that when people look back on the generation after him, like on my grandparents, I have black and white photos, but there's also a little snippet of VHS video around and some, some 8mm home movies and things like that that survived and were transferred. And so of my parents, I have them quite a bit on video. My mom is still alive. I should get more video on her in her old age. And I began to realize that the thing that people are going to look back on for my generation isn't going to be scratchy old photos. It isn't going to be grainy VHS videotapes. It's going to be my online footprint. That what is really happening with our online presence is that we are creating a legacy, and we just don't realize it. We're creating this legacy that will become the genealogy of the future, that if the world survives and the technology continues to advance, that our ancestors, we're the ancestors, so our offspring, our lineage, our great-great-great-grandkids will look back on us through what we put on the internet. So they will look at your Facebook page in 100 years from now to find out who you were. That's kind of scary. What does your Facebook page reflect about you? Is it really you, or the fake you, or the kind of you? Is it the you, the activist? Is it part of you, just a portion of you? Is it the whole you? Does it represent you at all? Do you even have one? Well, I thought, what's the best way to let my great-great-great-grandchildren know who I am, but to just tell them face-to-face that I now really possess a tool, a method, an opportunity that my ancestors did not possess. They did not possess the ability to speak directly down through time, through the generations, face-to-face, eye-to-eye. Yeah, so here I am. Hey, great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids. I'm Sage Wanderer. I lived a weird, wild, interesting life. What's up? Talking down through time. This is a time machine. This is a time machine. So, when I started this channel, that's kind of what I had in mind. And honestly, I did the Bill Hicks, Alex Jones video just as a test, just to see if the thing would work, and I could upload it, and I knew how to do it, and everything, and And then I got sidetracked by the Civil War, and the channel became political, and I mixed it with telling my own stories. And then, of course, originally I thought it would be fun to talk about conspiracy theories, and I thought that might make that part of the channel too. I could do conspiracy theories and stories, and so then I kind of started doing news, and then I told some true stories in my life that really caught on and caught some attention, like the MK Ultra trainer story about Shvali, the lady I met that went to my church. And, the stories of my life, like one time I almost got killed by hillbillies in the mountains. All kinds of stories, and stories about the music business and the people that I knew, and the adventures that I had. But I've really not told my whole story because I started out my channel kind of being at odds with people like Antifa and, American communists and gun grabbers. I mean, I called the richest and probably the most powerful and influential man on the planet a vampire to his face. And I still think George Soros is a vampire. I just can't prove it. So I had to protect my identity, and I was a little more careful about giving away too much. And so I've given you pieces of my life. If you're a fan of my channel, if you're watching this first video of my autobiography because you came here via my YouTube channel, then you know that you have a lot of the pieces, but you know there's chunks missing, and you're not sure about the timeline, and you're not sure about how it all went down, and so I know I've lived an interesting life, and I've had to reveal my life story in pieces also, not just because I'm protecting my identity, but also because you can't handle the truth. If you look at my second poetry video ever that I just did this morning, I did a poem, and it was about how people think I'm a liar when I tell my stories, because to them they seem so outlandish. But that's because they've lived a sheltered life. It's because they've lived a life of safety and comfort. And they were afraid to just risk everything, move to a new city, live on the street until you make it or break it, baby. You'll learn a lot. You have a lot of experiences when you do that. When you choose to walk away from a day job and you pursue art as a full-time job, that leads you down some crazy roads. When you approach life as though it's a giant playground, when you approach life as though you're in a race, and it's a race to accomplish your dreams, to have fun, to taste life, to suck the marrow out of the bone of life. I know that sounds gross, but you know, I think I quoted a famous poet, but nonetheless, but that passion, that desire to live and to really experience and to not let fear rule you, allowed me to live an interesting and amazing life. And people have told me, you need to write your life story. And so I tried. You know, I'm fairly well educated. I'm not really that great at writing as far as grammar is concerned. I think most of my grammar lessons come from reading. I'm a voracious reader, and I have read thousands and thousands of books. And, you know, thank goodness the internet came along right about the time my eyes started to fade, so now I can enlarge things. But I blew my eyes out in my life by reading so much. And so I kind of know how to write. I know what it's supposed to sound like. I know what it's supposed to read like. But that, you know, there's a lot to it. Writing is very, very hard. Hats off to people who write novels, because, you know, if you write novels or stories, is it first person, second person, third person? Is it he said, she said, they said, I thought, I did, I moved, I saw? All of these, and the describing things I'm pretty good at. You know, the descriptive tirades that you have to go on to show and to paint the picture of where you're at in a story, I can do. But the conversation, the way it rolls out, it's very difficult. And I can do it, but it's mind-numbing for me. It's soul-sucking for me. It's very difficult. And then you add to the fact that when I start to tell my story chronologically, you'll understand that I was born in a bad deal. I mean, I got dealt kind of a bad situation from the get-go. On some levels, on other levels, I was very blessed. But, you know, when it comes to certain things, I mean, I was born into an abusive home. Let's just tell the truth. This is where you're getting to see the real Sage Wanderer. You know, some of the things that you admire about me may have been formed from the very pain that I've had to endure in life. And many of you who have been a victim of childhood abuse know exactly what I'm talking about. You're feeling me right now, I can tell. I know, because I feel people when they talk this way. I know what it feels like, and you do too. And it's... overcoming childhood abuse made every other struggle in life look like nothing. It made me so strong. It made me so strong. You can't break me. If the old Marine couldn't break me, nobody can. So, I'm sorry. This is what made it difficult when I sat down to start to tell my story, because to tell my story, it kind of starts in this abusive environment, and it forces me to relive it. And it's really hard. It's why I put the pen down. I mean, I must have got, you know, I get to about the time I started to learn music. And, you know, I can't quite get all the way to there when I start writing chronologically, because I just start to fall apart trying to talk about it, trying to think. And part of it is because of that process of writing that's so difficult. Because, you know, if I write and then I walk away for a little bit and I come back, I have to go back and reread the previous section to kind of get the feel of where I'm at, and then it takes me back to that place again. And now I've spent all my time there, and I'm emotional, and it takes forever, and I don't get much done. So I thought also, in leaving this story to my great-great-great-great-grandchildren, I thought I would also write my book in this new way, a new medium, as it were. How does someone eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's something the old Marine used to say. So I'm going to tell you this story in little bits and chunks, in a chronological order, and I'll try to be as unemotional as I can be. But if you're a victim of childhood abuse, you know that it's hard. And I won't promise you that I'm going to talk much about the actual abuse. I don't like to talk about it. I'm going to try to get through it to get to the better parts of my story. But to know who I am, I have to walk through the abuse with you to some degree. Okay. So I'll probably cry and laugh as I tell this story, and I don't know how many episodes it will take to finish this autobiography. But let's just start at the beginning. I've done an 11-minute intro because this is going to be a really long series, and I'm going to keep working on it until it's done or I'm dead or time stops. So here it is. I was born in Oregon on the coast. I'm going to leave out details of names and places I was born and places I lived in because I don't want to be too traceable to the real me. This is the real me, but I don't want people to know my identity. I'm not about doxing myself, okay? You know, I've made Antifa angry. I've picked fights with the black Hebrew Israelites. Yeah, I've thrown down with communists and anarchists and Satanists and witches and powerful forces in the Illuminati, and I've made enemies. And so I'm not going to make it easy for some MK Ultra brainwashed crazy person to find me and force me into a life and death situation. But at the same time, I want to tell my story. And I suppose when I'm really old and it doesn't matter anymore, and I'm more insulated from this place in time, then I suppose my actual name will be attached to this story. But as for now, we'll just call me Sage Wanderer. So I was born on the Oregon coast. I have no memory of that because as an infant, barely out of the crib, and we were off to the next town, the next city, the next adventure. You see, I was born into a traveling band. I watched a show called The Partridge Family when I was a little kid, and I always identified with Danny Bonaducci because I was that little red-headed, very talented hellion in the family band, and we traveled around. Now, we didn't live on the road full time because I had to go to school, and also because, you know, my mom couldn't take being on the road. She needed a house. It's because my family is rooted in the Irish gypsy tradition on my mother's side. That on my mother's side, we are travelers, Irish gypsies. This is our first generation to really go legit, to enter into the normal life of Western society and stop being drifters. And so my mom was the first generation to put her foot down and go, I'm tired of moving around all the time. I'm tired of living out of the back of a car. I'm tired of living in a tent. I'm tired of living in a fruit picking camp. And so she forced my dad, who also has some Irish gypsy roots and some of that nature, because they both come from the Cherokee Strip, the Ozark Mountains, and there's a lot of our people from the Ozarks to the Smokies. And although my dad was mixed race, we'll get into that later in the story, very diverse genetically. He had a lot of Irish and English in him as well, which doesn't really matter except culturally. I'm not about race, I'm about culture. So my mom and dad met in a migrant fruit picking camp. I was a late life child. I was literally conceived for the purpose of the family band. And the method that my family had been doing long before I was born is that they would take a church and be the pastors of a church, pick that church up in September or October, and they would run it through the dark, cold Oregon winter, And when it come around to April or May, they would turn that church over to someone else to pastor, and then we would go on the road for the summer. And then the next summer, fall rather, we would land in a new town, and we would start another new church, or we would take over a small church. And it was because my dad had a real knack when he would take a church. In that 9-month period, he could turn a church around. He could take one that was anemic and barely surviving and build it into a flourishing church in 9 months. Or it's kind of like giving birth. I hadn't thought about it being 9 months before. That's funny. Or he could start from scratch, from inception of a church, and raise it up from a rented building into its own building, into its church, till it was running 50, 60, 70 in about 9 months. And then bam, turn it over to somebody who likes to stay in one place and run things and be a shepherd rather. And then we would go back out on the road for the summer and do it again. And this is how I went to 17 different schools growing up. That had a huge effect on me. But before I get to my school days, let's start with my earliest memories. Now, if you've watched this channel and you know the first thing about who I am, if you've heard me make music, if you've heard me talk about my intellect, if you've heard me talk about my gifts and abilities, then you know that I'm different than a lot of people. And those of you who think, oh, you're not that different, Sage, well, it's because you're different too. You just don't know how different you are. But unlike a lot of people, I have early childhood memories that go back to infancy. That my very first memory comes from a family incident when on one of our trips we decided, one of the few rare times, we decided to live outside of Oregon, and we moved to New Mexico, to a little desert town in the middle of nowhere. Eunice, I think it was Eunice, New Mexico. And anyway, I was just an infant. I realized after going back and tracing the family history, when this incident occurred, I was about 6 months old. So this is like very early childhood, infancy. And I have a total memory because Dad was in the pickup with all of the family's furniture, and my mom was in the chase car driving, and I was in the chase car with my mom and my sister, and my other sister and my dad were in the lead car in the truck. And we got separated on the interstate out in the middle of the New Mexico desert before there was cell phones, in a place where there was pay phones but miles away. And my mother carried no money. It was before women's lib, and she didn't have a dime, not 2 pennies to rub together, not enough for coffee. And we got separated on the highway, and they're freaking out. And my sister, who's a drama queen still to this day, grabs my stroller, my little car seat I was in, like a cradle, because they didn't have car seats back then. That's how old I am. I was in like a little carrier. And she grabs my carrier and pulls me up to her face and looks me right in the face and yells, "We're never going to see your daddy again. You're never going to see your daddy again. We're all going to die and you're never going to see your daddy again." Who has memories of being 6 months old? If you do, leave the comment in the comment section. So I have memories of being bathed in a sink, and I have memories of being so small, being bathed in a sink. I have the memories of interacting with the old Marine I didn't get to see him much. See, I was raised by women until I was 5 years old because my dad would have nothing to do with little bitty children. It was just a weird thing about him. He had a phobia of diapers. He didn't want to be around little bitty kids, and he kind of treated them like pets, animals. He'd come in and play with them a little bit and like, "Go ahead and get away from me, kid." And he didn't invest in me at all until I started to show signs that I was a musician, which happened at about 3 or 4. And then he would spend time with me trying to get my music motivated a little bit. But I have early memories of him wrestling around with me when I was barely able to stand up and walk, And he was rough on me then. He'd slap me and knock me down. He'd put my head between his legs and hold my head still and make me squirm and scream. And he just thought that was funny. Because you'll find, as I talk about the old Marine, that one of the bad sides about telling this story is I have to admit that the old Marine, my dad, the preacher, he was a sadist. He did get joy out of other people's pain, out of children's pain, and out of animals' pain. And it was something that was broken in him because of his childhood, which I guess at some point, maybe when it comes up in the storyline, maybe when I will tell you in the storyline about what happened to him in his childhood at the point in the storyline, the chronology, when I found out, which was much later in life. But he was hard on me. At the age of 5 years old, I'll give you an example. He took me away from my sisters and my mother, and I really didn't spend much time with them after that again, unless they were just watching me. And then the old Marine at 5 years old took me under his wing. And my first day with my dad, who I really hardly knew, he was this character that came in and out of my life. A lot of times he would leave before I was up in the morning, and he would not get home till after I was asleep. And I really only knew him from the man I saw in the pulpit, and the man I saw fighting with my mother, and the man who punished me. But when I got to be 5 years old, he took me with him, and my first day with the old Marine goes like this. Now, if you know my history, you know that I came to find out that I'm not Native American, but because of my dad's brown skin and the brown skin of one whole side of my family, they all believed that they were nearly mostly pure-blooded Indians and lived with a Native American culture and a Native American mindset and thinking, mixed with the Irish traveler. And that's true for both sides, but one side is white on my mom's side with supposedly some Indian blood, and the other is reversed on my dad's side. He was supposed to be mostly all Indian with a little bit of white blood, and turns out none of us are Native Americans. It was a DNA test, that a genetic test later in life recently, that proved that we weren't Indians. But my whole life I thought I was an Indian. See my video on my channel, I was a fake Indian for that story. But at this point in my life, he thought he was an Indian, and so did I. And he took me out in the woods at the age of 5 to test me, to show me the harshness of life, to give me my boy card or my man card. I don't know. But I just know we got in the pickup, and I tried to get him to talk to me, and he wouldn't say a word, which is not uncommon. The old Marine talked very little, except when he was in the pulpit. It was like, uh-huh, yep, okay. That's a conversation with the old Marine when he wasn't in the pulpit being paid to talk. But he took me out in the woods, and we were out in the pickup going out there, and it was a long drive, and he didn't say a word. And when we got there, he didn't say a word. And I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "Just for a walk. We're just going for a walk in the woods." And so we went out this trail, and he took off into the trees, and I had to run to keep up with him. I'm 5 years old. I don't really know where my body parts are yet. I'm running to try to keep up with him, and he's just kind of, my old man was fleet-footed. He was smooth in the woods. If you know the history of my channel, you know that my dad was a outdoor specialist, an outdoor guide, a fishing guide, a hunting guide. He started that business before he was old enough to drive a car, that he was doing that in the mountains of Arkansas for rich travelers and tourists when he was a young boy, that taking them out in the woods and giving them a fun time and giving them a big adventure, and then getting all of their money, or most of it, was his job as a kid. It's how he survived the Great Depression and helped feed his family. So my old man was smooth in the woods, and he went out and I had to run and keep up with him, and we came to this big ravine, this big canyon, and it was just bottomless. It seemed empty. And just, I mean, it must have been 60, 75 feet down to a creek with rocks, you know, and just instant death. And there's a log. And now when I say a log, I mean an Oregon log. So it's probably as big around as a culvert. So as big around as a bay window. So I don't know, as big around as a, oh man, what else? I don't know, 5 or 6 telephone poles around. You know, I'm talking a big tree. Down, but it was covered in moss, slippery, the bark was trying to fall off, and he just fleet-footed took right off across that. And he left me on the other side, afraid to go across. And he turned around and looked at me and said, "Come on, boy, come across right now." And then he left. And I went out across to try to get out there, and I got out in the middle, and the log debris underneath my feet gave way, and I fell, and I almost fell 60 feet to my death, and I wrapped my body around the tree, and I'm just terrified, and I'm yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and he's nowhere to be found. He is gone. He is gone like the wind, and I'm hanging out 60 feet over my death, wrapped around this log that is rotten and falling apart. I'm not sure how much time passed. I do know this, that eventually I got the nerve up. It had to have been an hour or more that I sat there thinking he would come back and save me, terrified, frozen in place until my bones and my body ached from holding on, and I decided if I didn't get off of that tree, I was going to die. I was going to fall to my death. I had to get off the tree. If he could do it, I could do it. I had to get across. And so I just kind of got up on all fours and scurried across, and chunks fell off, and I made it like a cat scrambling out of a bathtub. And I made it to the other side, and I rolled over on my back, and I looked up to the sky, and I took a deep breath, and I thought, I've survived, and all I could think of is, I hope there's another way out, because I don't want to go back across that thing again. And I look over, and in the edge of the tree line, where I couldn't see him, completely quiet, there was a sawed-off tree stump. And my dad was sitting on that sawed-off tree stump, and he had stuck a summer sausage roll in one pocket and a thing of crackers in the other, and a canteen when we left the truck. And he was sitting over there eating sausage, summer sausage on a cracker, drinking, and he goes, "You hungry, kid?" And yes, I did have to walk back across it. Only this time I watched what he did when we came back at the end of lunch, at the end of our little picnic. When I went back the other way across the log, I watched him more carefully, and I stepped where he stepped, and I walked the way he walked, and I moved the way he moved, and I made it across just like he did going back. But that was the beginning of my relationship with my father. And throughout these videos, you will see what a role he played in my life. And part of why I'm so different is because my family was so different. I hope you enjoyed this segment. I'm going to give one of these as often as I can, as much as I am emotionally able to, and I'll tell the story of my interesting life. And for those of you who thought I was making up some of these stories, you're going to get the truth here, because you're going to see them in context of my life, and you're going to understand that, my best stories have yet to be told. That there's so much that you can't handle, because if I told it to you all at once, you would all just think I'm a liar. And even the stories I've told get resistance, get people calling me a liar. See my poem I did today called "The Perils of an Interesting Life," to see how I feel about that. But I think when you see these stories you've heard through my channel in context, in a timeline, you'll know I'm no liar. I just lived a really crazy life, because I come from a crazy family. I come from 2 crazy families. All right, till next time, you've been watching Sage Wanderer's Autobiography.